Okay, great. So thanks for being here. I'm going to do a quick intro of the session. Well, not of the session, but a couple of things about the Amplio community of practice. So we did change the format again. I really like this one because it fits in well. Our plans are now to do them every other week, more or less, twice a month actually. And like today, it's the first Tuesday of the month. And then it's 2 weeks later, the Wednesday. And I say the 2 weeks later because sometimes that's the third Wednesday of the month. It can actually happen. So this one, we're going to talk about security. Andrew Townley is in the Amplio University ACE curriculum, which is the full thing Amplio Consultant Educators Program. And part of that involves a lot of heavy thinking on systems thinking and things of that nature. And Andrew, I think, actually knows more about Russ Akoff and systems thinking than I do. In fact, I know he knows more about Russ Akoff. But it's really nice to see security and system thinking blended together, and that's why I thought this could be useful. Now, the next ACE program, ACOP is going to be on Wednesday. I have a couple of people identified. And actually, if anybody hears this as an ICF graduate or advanced in that, Amplio takes a different approach than the normal ICF coaching style. I think I'm not going to say it's better or worse. It's different. It's more directed, but it doesn't tell people anything to do. It's really about guiding them to discover what they need to know, but you never tell them what they need to know, but you don't just let them figure it out by asking questions either. So that'll be the next one. If you have an interest in being on the panel, let me know. It's going to be a discussion about the different styles of how ICF does it and how Amplio does it with what I call Amplio Kata coaching, which is very similar. It kind of extends Mike Rother's Kata coaching. It was developed independently based on the same principles. I find that kind of interesting. I've seen this before, where two people to build something completely independent of each other that comes out remarkably similar. And when they come from the same foundations, that's not unusual that happens. So that's why I have this up here, just to get the dates and times. And you'll notice that's at 2 p.m. Now, the reason I did the change in time is this enables people in Australia and New Zealand to attend a bit better. And it's also better for some people on the East Coast. So notice the times flip. It'll always be 8 on Tuesday and 2 on Wednesday. So, Andrew, I'm going to hand it back to you or hand it over to you. And you can share when you want to, or you're in the panel. You're muted also.
Yeah, no, I had to, I was on the wrong screen, so I had to navigate the mouse, and then I'm going to do this, and then Zoom's going to go crazy. And so there's this, and that's what I want to do there, and share. So we have the share going now.
Yeah. Yeah, we see it.
Okay, perfect. And of course, it moved gallery view back to the middle of my screen, which is not where I wanted it. Okay, so I'm glad to be here with everybody. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Townley, and I primarily right now work with global 500 organizations to help them build effective value-driven security programs. And a lot of why I'm actually here hanging out with Al and the rest of the people in the Amplio University, I'll allude to in the slides, because a big part of the approach that I have to security is based on some of Al's earlier work. And I've been kind of trying to adapt and integrate some of the new things as we've gone along to make security actually different in the way that it's dealt with in the organization across strategy all the way through delivery and into operations. And so what I'm going to run you
Okay,
through today
okay,
is
okay.
really about my approach to agile security.
Sí, lo que pasa es que hoy en la mañana hubo un retraso en parte de plan, o algo pasó,
Carlos, I
pero se
think you're
corrigió.
not
Entonces,
muted. Thanks. So my approach to security and then how that actually enables us to do proper secure by design instead of still DevSecOps where security is an afterthought. So I want this to be, for you. This is not just me talking, although there is quite a bit of material that I can cover. So if there's anything where you have questions, just stop me as we go along. I got 3 screens, so I can't exactly see you. So just speak up and let me know. So what we want to do is kind of set the stage and talk about the reality of security and agile delivery today. So the first thing I want to do is ask you guys a question. So I'm going to see you over here. So how many of you have been involved with or been on a project that was delayed by security? Raise your hands. Yeah, okay. So that's actually pretty normal. And in fact, the statistics prove it. So the research that I've been doing over the last year or so tells me that 20 to 40% of the delays in IT projects are due to security. And the average duration of those delays is 8 to 12 weeks on any corner project that's really of any size at all. And so it validates what you've experienced and certainly what I've experienced, but we need to figure out why. It's not enough to just recognize it and complain about it. We need to figure out why. And the real reason is security is seen as a checklist of mandatory controls. It's an obstacle to be avoided at all costs because of all of the things we know security does. It's based on compliance scores shown to management, not actual risk management. And it's effectively the Department of No who's just going to slow you down or stop you from deploying the stuff you've been working on for the last 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years, depending on exactly how you've been delivering your project. So all this really means that security is not doing several things. So what are those things? Well, it's not brought into projects early. It's not based on a real understanding of the project's needs. It's not optimized to facilitate the smooth flow of value delivery. And it's not positioned as an enabler instead of a blocker. So one of the things that causes all of this is because security is not actually packaged to reflect the needs of the delivery teams. So if you get on a project and it's time to do security, that's generally just, a checklist of mandatory controls and a laundry list of, encryption at rest and identity management or icons sprinkled on a design document or whatever it is. And I mean, it's not really helpful. And if it's not helpful, it's not going to get used. And if it's not used, it's not really going to be effective. So all this leads to our current best practice DevSecOps activities. Now, this is my version of the sort of standard activities based on, again, combining a bunch of different things. So it may differ from your impression a little bit, but this is the aggregate that I found. So there's all these things typically done for DevSecOps. And if you do these things, you are theoretically supposed to be shifted left and doing secure by design. But there's a problem because all the red boxes are where security is, and the purple box is where design is. And so, wait a minute, secure by what? How, if we're not involved in the design, how can it be secure by design? It can't, right? So, I mean, I don't know. Is this typical for what you guys are seeing in the projects and environments that you're working on? Anybody have any things? I see nods. Okay. So let's talk about what I see as a big part of the problem. And part of this is the typical view of risk and impact by security. And it's really not helping us very much, but it is what everybody gets taught. And in fact, now we have entire university degree programs and graduate programs that are churning out what I consider to be brainwashed security professionals who think this is the only way to do security. And we're just institutionalizing more and more and more and more of the problem rather than actually teaching people how to think about it differently so that we can make a difference. So the typical view of risk and impact is we have this technology asset and there is some sort of relationship to an objective that the business cares about or wants to accomplish. We don't really know what it is. We know it's there, but we don't care because it's just about the technology assets. And we've got threats, and those threats exploit vulnerabilities in our technology assets, and they cause incidents, and then there's an impact. And so this is all we need to know if we're in security, because we've been taught that 75 years of security is really all we're still doing. And we don't recognize that 25 years ago, when e-commerce started on the internet and the .com thing happened, that all of the primary assumptions on which all of security today is based have started to be invalidated, because we're taught that this picture on the left is exactly what the world looks like we need to worry about from a cybersecurity perspective. It's about infrastructure, it's about networks, it's about security controls, and we have zones, we carve them up. And I mean, even zero trust is basically this on a smaller scale with, smaller boxes, but it's still the same. But the problem is that the actual world doesn't look like that. The actual world is a graph of connected things, and this is the supply chain of a particular solar cell component. And there are thousands of vendors. And we think we can manage all of that supply chain because we've got a certificate, we've got a checklist, we've got a contract and a requirement. And I mean, we're just delusional. We have an entire industry based on a fundamental foundation of illusion of control that no longer exists and hasn't existed for 25 years. And that's why we're failing. And that's actually why we're getting in trouble with Agile delivery as well. So what does the business care about? Well, the business sure as hell doesn't care about security. The business cares about getting stuff done. So this is a hypothetical sequence of events that starts from a customer order and ends in a customer receipt of a pizza. And we call that, as you guys know, a value stream. Now, I like the definition from Martin's Great Transition book, which is that a value stream is an end-to-end sequence of activities that delivers value to or delights a customer. It's similar enough to Al's definition of a value stream, but the point is that it is that end-to-end process. So that's what the business cares about. What we care about is not changing the infrastructure. And so if you really step back and look at this, it's no wonder we're screwing things up so badly, because we're just not aligned. In fact, we're not even hardly on the same planet. So how do we build a better model for security? Well, first off, you got to redefine what the hell you're doing. Because if we don't do that, security is always going to be an afterthought. That is the biggest problem. We think security is something we can do afterwards. We can bolt it on, we can just apply the controls, but we just do what we need to do and it's fine. So some time ago, I don't actually remember when, but I started thinking about this. And I said, well, we need a new definition of security. So my definition of security is that it's the degree of confidence someone who is a customer has that they're going to get what they want, which is some value, some objective, something. And it's a degree of confidence because some things matter more than others. And so you want to be able to sleep soundly at night, knowing that the things that are most important to you are going to happen the way you expect. And that is due to a direct correlation with the amount of confidence you have that things are, quote unquote, under control. So if we kind of look at that, then what that does is a couple of things. One, it puts us squarely focused on making sure that the outcome is what gets done. And that means we're back to being important to the business, because you can't separate security from getting an objective with this definition. It is impossible. And it means that we need to understand what value is and how we can get it, and the relationship between customers and value and all of this stuff. So I went and found Austrian economics, because Austrian economics, unlike traditional economics, comes from the perspective that economics is actually the study of human behavior under scarcity. So it's about people, the way they make decisions, and that is really how the world works, because the world is full of people. It's not full of mathematical models. It's not full of economists. It's not full of computers that don't do anything without people or for people. So if we don't understand and start with the people, we're actually, again, delusional about what it is that we're trying to do here. So basics of economics, I'm going to run through this a little bit quick, but you'll know it, but there's some subtleties. So we've got a customer, someone needs a job to be done. So I got that jobs to be done concept from Clayton Christensen. Al's been talking about it from the book. I haven't seen the book. I mean, I've seen it, but I haven't read it. And that customer reaches out to some supplier who is someone with a value proposition to meet and can help them get their job to be done. And they provide some sort of good or service. And once the customer consumes that good or service, then the customer gets value. And at some point along the line, they have paid the supplier for those goods or services. Now, the one thing that is not really apparent in most people's conversations about cost and value is that they're not the same. Because if cost and value were the same, why would the exchange take place? So this is pretty fundamental, because whatever the good or services is worth more to the customer than it is to the supplier. Otherwise, they wouldn't transfer it. And it's not about the good or service that the customer is paying for. It's about what they can do with that good or service to do their job, or make them feel better, or make them feel important, or whatever it is. So we really need to understand value. And I know Al spends a lot of time talking about value, but we need to think about how we really determine value. So there's three key factors of value. First one is the customer. Second is the job the customer is trying to do. And three is the needs they have or think they have. So if you don't really understand all three of those things, you're never going to be able to have an intelligent conversation about value, because you're missing a key piece. Because value is actually subjective to the customer based on how important the job they want done is to them. It's never going to be the same. How do we put all this together then? Well, we've got our value stream. And so for each of those interactions, we've got supplier and a customer relationship. So in the first case, we've got a supplier, which is the business. And then we've got the customer, who is the customer that's hungry with the pizza. And they actually want the pizza. So that's the good or service delivered by the supplier. And the value that the customer gets is they're no longer hungry. But there's another interaction which goes the other way. But it's the same fundamental model of interactions. It's just that the roles of customer and supplier are played by different parties. So in this case, the supplier is the customer is the business, and what they exchange is the money. And the value is that the business is getting revenue. So if we understand value streams, and we understand that at each stage of the value stream, actually, because this scales, you can go down to each interaction, is in fact a pair of customer-supplier relationships about the exchange of goods or services, and then you put it in the scope of the business, then the true scope of the security is actually all of that, because it is about making sure that that happens. So this gives us a new definition of cyber risk that is also not aligned with what everybody thinks they're doing right now, because cyber risk is about vulnerabilities and threats. Oh my God, there's a new threat. Oh my God, there's a new 0-day. Well, so what? You don't have, it's going to happen no matter what. So you have two choices. You chase your tail every day and run around like headless chickens, or you figure out a different way to manage it that's actually based on how people manage their own risk in the real world. And so that's really the fundamental approach that I've tried to take, because then it means cyber risk is whether there's a failure to deliver a business outcome as the result of errors or failures in delivering or using technology. So I take an operational risk view of this at all levels. So I don't really make these distinctions. But for the people who are cyber pedantics and want to only focus on the infrastructure, then I put that in delivering or using technology thing in there just for them, so that they're happy and they can figure out that they're not being left out. But the point is that it's about resilience. It's not about secure infrastructure that doesn't change or is free from vulnerabilities or whatever. Because if I know that my environment is unstable, or my environment is not under my control, I'm going to plan differently about how I go about my objective than if I think I have the illusion of control and stability in my environment. And if I have those aligned, then I have a pretty good chance of getting what I want. If they're not aligned, and if I think I have more control than I do, then that's the situation we're in today. And that's why things are really, really screwed up. So how do we really deliver this? Well, we can really only control two things. And I got this from the negotiation approach for Jim Camp, who actually got it from Peter Drucker. I think, I don't remember. He got many things from many different places, but maybe this one didn't come from Drucker. But we can only really control two things. How we choose to spend our time, which is our activity, and how we choose to respond to events, which is our behavior. And we as individuals have this choice. Once you get outside of you, you don't have control over anymore. You have influence, and the degree to which you have influence fits a bunch of other things. But here also is where we have this illusion of control, because we think that if we're in charge of an organization or we're in charge of security for an organization, we have control. And in fact, we don't, because everybody has these choices every day and they're making them. We just need to try and make sure they're as aligned as we can make them with what we want through the alignment things that Al talks about as far as the principles and Amplio. But the key point is it's always a choice. And if we bring this into security, then we can look at this typical model a little bit differently and say, well, what can we really control? We can't control the threats. We can't really control the vulnerabilities because we don't know if the bugs are there or not. And we can't really control the incidents, but we can control the vendors we use, and we can control our readiness and response. So if we do those things and focus on the impacts rather than all of the things that can cause the impact, then we can control our understanding and the design of the way we pursue our objectives. And that actually means that we have a higher degree of confidence, which is more likely to result in us getting successfully what we want. So here again, just reframing this back to our core model, we can control the supplier we use. We can control the way we specify the goods or services. We can control whether we accept or reject them. And we can control what we do if we don't get them. We also control what we do if we do get them. So what you can do in the value streams, or if you look at value streams in general, organizational, interaction between teams, interaction between individuals. This model applies to all that. And you can represent any interaction at any scale with this model, and you worry about the things in green, and you have a much higher chance of success than you would otherwise. So I have taken this and built a fundamental model, which is the customer supplier relationship about value, and put it in a box that defines the rules under which that interaction takes place. And then I've married this with my understanding of Acroft's soft systems thinking and the way that each system is some essential part of one or more larger systems of which they are a part. And you can always go upwards and outwards, and you can always go inwards and downwards. And every time you do, it's recursive. This top box, you can look at it from the supplier perspective, and inside a supplier, it's the same thing. You've got an enabling governance domain, which is now the supplier, and the supplier has customers, and it's also a customer, and it just scaled. So this is a formalization of a model to allow you to put some rules for any system that you discover so that you have a chance to make sure you maximize the success of the outcomes you want from an operational risk point of view. Any questions so far on that? Make sense? Okay, more nods. Great. You guys are being really quiet. So either I'm talking too fast or I'm like, overwhelmed. So, all right. I see smiles, so I'll keep going. So the value-driven security program. Well, so the value-driven security program is my approach to applying this at the enterprise level across delivery and operations and strategy and everything. So in the beginning, there was SABSA and LeanBot. So I was a student of SABSA since I met John Sherwood in 2005 at a conference. We were both on a panel, and he started talking about SABSA from a security point of view, and it was architecture, and it was layers, and it was enterprise architecture. And I was kind of doing that stuff, and I said, this is interesting. And then I got to be where I taught SABSA Foundation for 5 years and lots of other stuff. But then I was trying to do it. The problem is doing SABSA is a lot harder than it looks. And I had tried pretty much every way possible to do this. And I knew it needed to be done in iterative ways, and I needed to formalize that. So I went to the Agile space and I looked at all the people that I respected. And the only person that I thought really consistently was saying anything that made sense was Al. And LeanBot at the time was what was current. And so I took that, and that was when I found it, it was like 2014, 2015. And then I put it together into something that I called the Agile Security System at that time, which for me was everything. But mostly it talked about a set of principles, practices, and things for building architecture, but I knew that that was not in isolation. And of course, this iterative scroll here at the bottom was part of how you do project delivery. And for me, it made perfect sense. And I helped clients do this, and it was not a problem. But by 2024, I realized that the architecture part was pretty clear. And then I needed something that talked about how to operationalize it a bit better, because I had a bunch of process documentation down to like 6 levels of decomposition, but that's not right. I was asked for it, so I built it, but I'm like, but this is not really how I do it. And it's not how you should think about it, because it's a process, it's fixed, and it's got to be integrated and flow and whatever. So based on collaborating and finding and getting the opportunity to collaborate with Al on some of the Amplio stuff over the last 2 years or so, I did a bit of an upgrade. And so I said, okay, so I want a way to look at the way security is integrated into the entire organization that is easy for people to understand, that is not prescriptive, it's not a process. So how can we do that? And I took the APQC process classification framework, which I've used for years, and I kept applying. I have a principle in the Agile security system that's called violently encapsulate complexity, so that you basically abstract and abstract and abstract. And I did that to the PCF, and I said, okay, well, actually, if you look at what an organization does, there's 3 core value streams. One is strategy, one is delivery, and one is a feedback loop for improvement. And all of the things that are in the details of the pages and pages of the PCF fit in here. And then I abstracted those a little bit into some small set of activities that I could talk to people about. And then I said, well, where should security be involved? And so all these little locks are where security should be involved. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then inspired by the Amplio GPS navigator, whatever the hell, diagnostic tool is what we're calling it now. But so I said, well, it would be cool if I had something like that for security. So I said, well, what would that look like? And mine is a little different, because I said, well, it's got to, if I'm going to do the entire scope of security, it's got to map security in the value streams. So let's start there. And then that gave me basically 4+1 aspects of security that do different, very well-defined things because of the way they interact between the value streams. So they talk about different things, and you've got capabilities that move from the security capabilities aspect are available to secure by design, which is the key point that I will come back to. And then, whoops, you hit the right button and the screen doesn't go blank, and you hit that button. And then, so secure by design happens, which is the green one. And then those go into solutions, into operations, and you know what the expectations are, you know how to monitor them, and so on and so forth. And then as you do secure by design, you discover that maybe there's some new capabilities you need, or some differences in the performance of the security capabilities, or changes, or whatever. You feed that back in as a requirement to the strategy, so that everything is integrated and it's not the one-off things. Oh God, we need this now. And somebody goes and does it, and nobody remembers what it's done, or it does something exactly almost the same as something else, and it's a mess. And then, so business value then is delivered by the secure by design process, that is security and delivery working together, and it's measured and validated in the security strategy aspect by reporting and integration with the business. So that is the kind of flow view. And the thing about this, which may not be apparent from the diagram, is that the security value delivery system is a system for what value-driven security looks like in an organization. And each one of those aspects, those different colored triangles, is a different essential element within that system, which means that there's defined interactions between them. And then, of course, each one of those can be further decomposed into its own essential elements, which I'll show you in a few minutes, just to highlight. And those relationships can be defined. So it is really not a prescriptive thing. It can be a diagnostic tool, just like the Amplio tool, and it can tell you the patterns and relationships and everything if you don't have a solution for it, or how you can improve things. So there's some core models. So that core customer supplier relationship, then I took to the organization, and these generally scare people, but this is the value delivery network of your organization to the outside world. And it is the same because I used to draw different models that were 80% or 90% the same for every client, and then finally realized, well, that's stupid. Why don't you just fix the model and draw it once and then start from that and then build on it? So eventually in 2019, when I figured that out, I came up with these two primary perspectives and then these core relationships. And so each one of those is a customer supplier relationship, which then means that you can understand the operational risk based on what you can control and not control. And then there's a simplified version for the people who get freaked out by the arrows, where you can use to talk about contextualizing whatever you're dealing with. So an architecture, business unit, whatever, it's got to go in some of those boxes somewhere. And so this gives you a really quick, easy way to get things into your system, which then if you've got the rest of the parts documented, you can tell immediately what security is supposed to do.
Yeah, Andrew,
So
I want to
taking
back up.
that.
I want, can you back up to one more slide? The earlier
Yep.
one. No, one more. Yeah,
Yep.
one more. There we go. There we go. I want to make a comment on this because, to be candid, um, I've spent years railing against prescriptions until a couple of weeks ago. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, really good consultant. He said prescriptions are a good thing. I realized what I've been railing against are prescriptions where you haven't done a diagnosis. And the fact is that most of the agile space does prescriptions without a diagnosis. Almost by definition, a framework is a prescription without a diagnosis. So prescriptions aren't bad. And I wanted to point out what the screen looks like because there's something that was definitely implied, and you might have even said, Andrew, but I wanted to make sure it's clear. When you do something like this and you see what's wrong, and it gives you a choice, gives you insights rather on what to do, it's possible to make a prescription at this point that, of course, you're going to adjust and things like that. But a lot of people really want this. They want to follow. There's nothing wrong with people wanting to follow, but you better give them something they want that's going to not just they want, but will actually do them good. So this is the what you have here is the flexibility of just playing it dynamically as you go, or creating a plan that we'll call it a prescription, call it a plan, whatever you want to, call it an improvement backlog, call it a roadmap. I don't care. But this is really what's the power
All right, let me.
of Amplio, as well as the power um, of the ability to adjust the rate of change and adjustment, because that is necessary because different companies, organizations are in different situations. Okay, I just wanted to inject that, and it's kind of interesting. Andrew seems to have learned a little bit about style from me too, because this is you need to pause to take a breath at times, or give us a breath at times. So I'm speaking as you're my mirror here.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so I wanted to inject that. I didn't know if anybody had questions about that or you see that. Seems like there's a lot of nodding going on.
Yeah, and the other thing about this as well is because it's defined as a system of essential parts, as long as you understand what those relationships are, you can evolve those parts at different rates, doing different things. So you can do exactly what Al said. You can give people what they want in one area, maybe, but without having to boil the ocean or eat the entire elephant or however it goes.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
Thomas has hand up.
Yeah,
yes.
it reminded me on the similarity of the style between Andrew and Al. The when you said that you discovered that the structure of the business value delivery was like 80% the same across all your clients, that sounded very similar to what Al has emphasized with the generic value stream, where he started doing very custom value streams, and then he realized, oh, they're almost all they're very similar, and so the idea of using there's probably a Pareto in there, right? You use a generic delivery stream concept, and then you just modify it slightly, and that maps to almost every client then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is, you can't read it here, but this started out basically as the people process technology, and then I kept adding bits and pieces to it that were relevant. So there's information and products and services, and then of course the technology things. And again, because this is the nature of the model, if you don't need some boxes or don't care about them at a time, you just don't worry about them. But if you need to add some, then I have another set of things that I can talk about that are already defined, or you can add things at this second level. But most of what happens with the customers that I have anyway happens inside each of these individual boxes. So it's specializations of those things or subcategories of those things, and it doesn't change these fundamental relationships. And here again, this is the power of systems thinking too, because a value stream is a system, and values, product delivery, or if anybody's working together to do something, that didn't just spring out of somebody's brain one day when they woke up in the morning. That kind of is a um, enhancement or refinement of what people would do naturally. So all of these things are modeled on real world systems. It's just formalizing specific real world systems back to the complexity discussion yesterday, actually. So, the organization seems crazy. This diagram seems crazy. But if I understand that those relationships are really all the same, they just go with different boxes, or that I can take any two of them and look at them in this way. Well, I haven't changed the picture, but I've changed the way I interpret the picture. And by using this picture, I can change the way I interpret what's going on in my organization as a system by applying these things. So this is my thing about complexity, which I'll take just 2 seconds to say, because I take a particular view of Akoff's soft systems theory. I don't use or need most of this stuff. I just, it's systems and elements and relationships. And if I don't know enough, then I haven't found the right systems, and I just keep going until it makes sense. And so, I think there's a lot of new stuff out there that if you really kind of understand systems at a fundamentally deep level, you recognize as just kind of variations on the same thing said a little differently, which is nothing wrong with that, because if people resonate with that more than you or anybody else, then that's okay, as long as they're able to move forward and get productive. But I mean, for me, it's just confirmed that systems thinking the right way is it, because there's nothing I've ever seen that I couldn't explain if I really looked at it that way. And so that's really the other part of why this is the way it is, and why it's, it is systems from the ground up, pretty much all of it. And the way that I talk about delivering secure by design and integrating security, again, it's all about systems. So anything else before we move on? And I'll try and slow down, maybe. So this is the full map with all of the different elements, and they all mean something, but there is relationships between them, and I have them all mapped out in my sort of graph navigation thing so that I can look at them and talk about them and whatever else. But the point is, just like in the Amplio system with the capabilities and patterns, it's about what the thing is and what it's supposed to do in the role that it has in security, from everything to those aspects, which are the big slices, to the individual parts. And so you got to have those somewhere. And if you don't have them, then something's missing. You don't have to implement them all to the same level of detail or whatever, and you don't have to change them all at the same time, but you got to know that they exist. Otherwise, you don't know what you don't have that is really required to deliver value from a security perspective. So let's just quickly look at what all this means to doing secure by design right. So this is the zoomed in view of the delivery stream, and it's set up for iterative kinds of things, which is what this is. So we do this stuff and then we iterate until we get something else. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. Establish and prioritize security capability backlog. So this is really how we make sure we don't have the secure by design problems that we have today, and security is a blocker. Because if we have done everything or even just a little bit of the stuff in the security value delivery system map, we're ready to do this. And it's a matter of saying, what is this project trying to do? And which of the security capabilities do I need to do this at the conceptual design or even at the idea stage? Because the fallacy that people have is that, oh, well, the security requirements are going to change from the back of the napkin to when it's actually implemented and deployed in production. And that's just wrong. I mean, if it does, then something is missed somewhere well earlier than by the time it gets production. So we leverage this in the approach that I have so that we work from a set of capabilities and then we pick those and say, all right, do we have those? And if we don't, then we kind of say, all right, well, this is what we don't have, and this is approximately how long it's going to take. And, are you okay to wait or not? And then you make decisions about that. Then once you actually have the point where you've got your MVIs defined and you're actually worried about what you're going to do, you do the same process and you prioritize features and stories and say, well, these are the ones that we can do, no problem. So those can go in a different priority than the ones that, well, these three things depend on a security capability that either doesn't exist in this platform or isn't quite what you need. So we need to park those for now, and we still focus on maximizing the amount of value that's delivered. But it is with security continually revalidating that whatever is planned as the design gets from, the back of the napkin to what the implementation plan is, that anything that can be done with existing security capabilities goes and it doesn't stop, and then is also validated as part of the normal validation and quality assurance process, rather than stop the world security reviews and those kinds of things. Because, I mean, if you want flow, you can't stop flow just to check security. You got to figure out how to make security in flow and validate that you have it with the appropriate level of oversight. And it's possible. You can do it. It's just most people don't even think about it. And if they did, they wouldn't know how to do it anyway, because they're missing all this other stuff around it that is required to make it happen. So then, you do the incremental assessments and mitigation plans, and you support the control integration, assurance, and automated tests as required. Now, there are different people involved in doing this, but this is really what it looks like at a high level. There's really only those 4 different touch points in delivery, but they're not just touch points, they're totally integrated into the process, which is different than our best practice DevSecOps activities. So what I did as well to prove this is I took these things and then I said, well, actually, there's 14 things that need to happen in Agile delivery, or any delivery. Is just they're packaged a little different in Agile versus Waterfall, because security can't just do Agile. Security has to be able to support any level of project delivery. But if we take that, then we can look at this and we can remap these into parts. And we see that most of those things that actually matter are in the plan phase, and we shift so that we really focus on the design rather than the development and implementation, because the design is what's going to make the development and implementation happen. Now, it's not that this precludes iterative design. It's not that this is big design up front. It is just that you use these things that have to happen to get you to the point where you can start development to define what security is so that you don't have surprises later. And we've got our classic cost of change curve. So where most threat modeling happens, for example, is right here where this arrow is. And where most security happens is after that. And of course, it's at the wrong part of the curve. And what I'm talking about is you integrate security from an architecture perspective as early as step 3, if you can. And so when we talk about shifting left, most shift lefts actually only shift to step 9. They don't shift really left to where it actually makes a difference. So it saves time, money, and waste. Now I'm going to go through the mapping, and I know I haven't updated this, Al, but your new diagram doesn't lend itself as well to what I did as the old one did. So forgive the ancient history view of the GPS here. But so if we put these two things together, what we've got is we've got kind of our customer journey here, then we've got our MVIs, and then we do our features and our stories. This all makes sense. But we have to do security in two dimensions. We have to do security at the enterprise level across all of those different layers. And we also have to do it at the project. So how do we do it at the project? Well, we go back to these loops, iterative loops. And so what that looks like as an overlay is that we've got strategy, design, change, and execute is the core phases of the Agile security system. And so we start with the strategy at the organizational level to say, what are we doing? What are the technologies that we're doing? What are the customer value propositions that matter? What gives the most revenue? What's most important? And then we look at those and we pre-allocate the capabilities that we need. How are we going to do delivery? CI/CD pipeline, what platforms, what are the deployments? We figure this stuff out, and then we build a bunch of capabilities that support project delivery. And then once we do that, then for any particular project, we have smaller loops, or maybe, not as many or as many people, and then fewer loops as we get more and more detailed, because theoretically, the only reason we would need to do another loop from a security point of view as you work through the strategy, design, change to deliver this stuff is if we've really missed something. If we've not, if there's really a surprise. But if there's a surprise, there's something else wrong. So the whole iterative process happens at each stage so that the change happens and the stories are delivered and value is actually consumable. And then it goes into operations. So the key building blocks, if you will, that make this happen is that we've got security policies and security patterns there. Those drive a set of capabilities, standards, and blueprints. And then those pieces are layered into the governance model where all of the different elements happen. So I know this is kind of a busy picture, but it shows the distribution of those 14 elements. It shows where the different parts of the security stuff are used. And it really kind of ties everything together and validates that security is integrated into the design. It's not as an afterthought. And as we know, kind of intrinsically, doing it right makes a big difference. So I have gotten my teeth into Reinertson's cost of delay stuff, and I've split it out into opportunity cost of delay and material cost of delay to talk to people to justify this, because the biggest problem I see in organizations who want to adopt secure by design or shift left or do any kind of thing is, oh, we don't have the budget. Well, okay, so let's actually talk business instead of technology for a minute so that we can figure out how to get you the budget. And it turns out that if we put everything we've talked about together and we see that 8 to 12 weeks of delay for a project that's supposed to have an ROI of 2 billion over 12 months for the typical Global 500 Global 500 company that's in the 60 to $80 billion a year annual revenue range, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we are losing $308 million of financial return on this project with an 8-week delay. So if you're going to invest 10K, 100K, $2 million versus 308 million in lost financial returns, then it's a no-brainer decision. And that's just one project. Most organizations the size I deal with do between 500 and 1,500 projects, where at least 80 to 100 of them are of this magnitude, where they are expecting to grow top line revenue, or they're expected to grow profits because they're expected to deal significant cost reductions. So, these numbers add up like crazy. And the justification writes itself because, like I said, it's just one project. And that's all it is. So if you run bunches of projects, you don't have to worry about how to get the justification. You just need to be able to speak in business terms about how to make this happen so that you can integrate security into delivery the way it's supposed to be, so there's no more delays. So that's all I got. And if you want, I have some videos on YouTube and I do daily emails, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Stunned silence. So I was still channeling too much Al.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I liked it, and I've been getting good reactions from people also on the chat. Is there I'm curious if anybody sees any way they could apply this, maybe not the whole thing because that might take more, but even just some insights into how you're working now, because that's often the way you get things like this in. Sometimes you can get everything, and sometimes you just kind of make a little nudge here and there, and then it starts opening up.
What resonated the most? Or
Yeah.
what?
Susan looks like
what
she's about to try to say something.
And
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised at how similar this is to the whole idea of testability.
Yes.
Because you were going down some very familiar trails, and I've never dealt with security.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do have, as you know, a background in quality assurance as well, because that was kind of the first gig that I had for real. And that has maybe influenced me as well, but it's all the same. I mean, you know, it's all the same, but it's really all the same. Anything else from anybody?
Andrew, I would say my perspective is more as a manager, but this was fantastic, right? I'm not a software guy, but the way you brought this, I think more down to what's important to a business, and then how does security fit into it. So within a very short a period of time, you knocked it out of the park, man. I mean, this is fantastic information. I really liked it, Andrew.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm glad I was that's the reaction that I was hoping for. So I'm glad I got it. Anything else?
Yeah, I want to echo the kudos. I mean, there's a lot of good content. It's almost overwhelming when I don't see this for the first time. You had shared this with me maybe half a year ago, and so some of this looked a little familiar and now upgraded. So well done on that. Generally, I like the slides and the use of a lot of graphs and charts. And one thing that I'm still struggling a little bit with is what's sort of specific about the system to security, right? I always thought, what if you change the word security into business and you just say this is a business value delivery system where security is just one of many things that stakeholders care about, just like functionality or maintainability or if somebody asked me what is specific about this to security, I would not be able to give a very good answer. What are your thoughts on that?
Because that is the point. That is actually the point. It's just operational risk. And thinking that security is special because it's technology is what's gotten us in trouble. So what this actually, and the reason that I actually do have a business value delivery system registered, but if I, like, this freaks people out in security because, oh, that's not my lane. You're talking about risk and ERM and it's like, no, it's the same. You just need to apply it to what you're dealing with. But if you can't start from value and figure out where the operational risks are that you can manage based on what you can really control, then what value are you really adding? So you are absolutely right, Thomas. This is a business execution system, in fact, which is where I started with it in 2012. And if I really am coming clean.
Well, I think those 14 categories of concepts where you say a holistic approach to software defect analysis and management. So would you say this is just subsumed in the broader umbrella of risk management?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because to me, my view of operational risk, and there's actually a video on this out of one of the programs that I did. But my view of operational risk is that that's the only kind of risk. Everything else is a function of operational risk, because if you take operational risk to its core, it's that the mechanical things in my system are going to fail, and I'm going to make a mistake, either of error or errors of commission or omission. And that's what operational risk is about. And you can control your behavior, and you can control the response that you have. And so if you really understand the objective you're supposed to reach, you are going to know which things are going to knock you off your horse and how you're going to deal with those. Mm-hmm. And it changes the whole narrative. But yeah, it's, I mean, this is nothing specific for security, but it's just so broken in security that but it works at the whole organization level as well.
Yeah, before I make a comment, Susan, did you have something to say? It looked like you did. I'd like you to talk first, and then I want to wrap something up here.
No, it's just that in addition to being similar to paths I've taken in testing, it's also similar to paths I've taken in business analysis, which reinforces your point of view.
Yeah. I want to observe, it's funny, Thomas, I really appreciated your comment, because I was actually about to say something similar, but I was glad I waited because I really liked how you said that. So notice this whole talk has had at least 4 themes in it. I mean, had one theme, but then we've added testing, business, brought in the Amplio system. The reason is there's a generic approach that all these take. What's your business value? What's in the way of the business value? How do you create a prescription to fix what's in the way of the business value? How do you drive by Reinertsen's cost of delay? So what we have here is a meta pattern that is part of the Amplio system. And once you get this down, everything becomes simpler. I was listening to, I listened to Richard Feynman. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. And I just decided to pick up another one of his books, and I've got his short things. And he said something interesting that I had forgotten. I remember this is what in the 80s, when I built a development system, when you do systems properly, and as you learn them deeper and deeper, things get simpler, not more complicated. Okay.
Yep.
Now it sometimes looks more complicated because it's all of a sudden gotten broader. Oh my God, look at all the stuff we do. But actually the underlying means is actually less theory, because you find the true universal things and then it explains everything. This is one of the problems physics has. It doesn't have a unifying theory. It'd be a lot simpler if it did. And one day maybe they will, maybe they won't. But each of the sub theories they have get simpler over time while they get more powerful. So it's just an interesting thing. Tony, did you have something to say too? You look like you might. I didn't know. I didn't want to cut you off. Yeah.
Yeah, I just was thinking the term paradigm shift, or really a fundamentally different approach based on my own tangential experience with security. I've never been involved directly in it, certainly not to the base not to the depth that that you described, Andrew. Very, very interesting, and I think really important.
Yeah.
I think there are implications.
You know, it's funny you say paradigm shift, because actually I'm going to start thinking, I think we should talk about the Amplio paradigm shift. The Amplio paradigm shift is simply, what's your business? You know, what I just said. And it's like, well, duh, except very few people do it. In fact, even the people I really like don't quite do it, because a lot of people come up with a predetermined bent. I don't mean, there are a lot of consultants like I know who take this exactly, but they don't have a framework or an approach. They just are generally smart and know lean and flow and things like that. You tend to get biased toward a particular approach. It's something I totally avoid, I know, but when you have one, see, that's the problem. That's the problem when you create something, is you fall in love with it, even if you know it's flawed, you know. Anyway, Susan, you had something else.
I was just going to say, I think part of the problem is that a lot of software people think they're engaged in technology projects and don't realize that they're engaged in business projects.
Yes.
Yes.
And that means
Very
people
true.
projects.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
very good. Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, the way you started out, Andrew, where you said, 20 to 40% of the projects in IT projects are between 8 and 12 weeks late. That reminded me of the stats that Tom Gilb also cited in this How Big Things Get Done from Brent Fliffberg or something, where he
Yeah.
says like 98.4% of all large projects don't deliver on the things that they were set out to deliver. So
Yeah.
there's a large failure rate, basically, or not properly mitigated risk. And so I think for this approach, it would be extremely valuable if you had a couple of case studies over time that showed that with this security delivery system in place, how the delivery expectations are improving. That would be an extra data point that, in addition to talking the numbers to the CFOs, this is how much you could save. This would also lend much more credibility, I think.
Yeah, and I have those metrics in sort of the adoption work that I do and the other publishing. And I use his book, actually, Big Things Get Done, in my Invisible Crisis book that talks to the CEOs as well. But the problem I have is nobody wants to admit how bad they are. So they don't want to see because they still can't get over the fact that, well, if we actually figure out how terrible we are now so that we can show how much better we are then, we're going to get our butts kicked because we're so terrible. And it's like, no, the entire industry is broken. You are just doing it like everybody else. But if you don't start to track stuff the right way, the right stuff, then how are you going to prove that this is, well, we'll know. And
Your delivery system is bad, but rest assured you're in good company because everyone else is equally bad or worse.
Well, this brings up an interesting graphic. You show here's where people are where their delivery system is bad. Now, one step above that is you have an equally bad delivery system, but you are aware of it. People need to
yeah,
to realize that's a step up because most people have no clue. Most people use the high failure rate as an excuse to stay where they are and have a high failure rate. Anyway, really great job, Andrew. This was I really
Yes,
like this. This is a
excellent.
good experiment of the ACE program, and you hit it out of the park. We'll continue this again for those people who are in the program. Uh, the this happy to do these if you ask me you want to present something because we got a lot of smart people and we're all learning together to be better. So thanks again. I'll get this up on the web if you want to send it to people soon. Take care,
perfect.
and I'll.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Andrew.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Oh, Andy. Nice one.
Yay.